Thank you. I'm very happy to be invited to come here, and I'm glad that you showed up to listen to me as well. I'm a PhD student here at the University of Iceland, a student in archaeology, and my main supervisor is Elin Ahlin Sundman. Here I also have in my supervision committee and Anna Kjellström is at the University of Stockholm. And I'm also from Sweden, so that's why I have this presentation in English instead of Icelandic. And my doctoral research project is about medieval masculinities and bodies, and today I'll talk about perfect body and some Icelandic bodies, and I'll be showing you quite a lot of skeletons because this is an osteological study of medieval bodies. So in my speech today, I will first talk about masculinities and bodies, sort of the theoretical background to my research, and particularly then how osteological analysis of skeletons can be used to study medieval masculinities. And then I'm going to talk particularly about the medieval clerical masculinities, which will be the focus of the talk today. I'm going to talk about medieval body ideals of clerics, and particularly one part of the body, the mouth and ante-mortem tooth loss. That is losing your teeth while you're still alive, not when they fall out in the grave when the body decomposes. Then I'm getting to probably the most interesting bit, the examples from Skriðuklaustur, and I'm going to show you some of the canons and patients buried there. And then I'll just give you a brief summary to remind you what I've been talking about before we can have some questions and discussions at the end. So masculinity, what do I mean by this concept and how am I going to use it? It's usually refers to qualities associated with men. Could be like personality type, appearance, interests. But all men do not necessarily possess these qualities, and women can have them too. It's just that they're generally associated with men, and it's not then about finding some kind of male essence, as masculinities are very diverse. They could be different in different societies, but also different within a society for different groups of men that have different ideals. Perhaps you can think about different professions or different age groups that they perform masculinity in different ways. It's also highly changeable over time. So for example, medieval masculinities then are different from the ones we have today. It can also change in an individual during the life course. So it's something that is very fluid and very changeable. And this change makes it, of course, a bit difficult to apply modern concepts to medieval context, because their notions of masculinity were different from ours today. There was not even a concept exactly equivalent to what we talk about when we mean masculinity nowadays. And ideas of sex and gender has changed. Bearing that in mind, scholars still have found masculinity a useful analytical tool when investigating medieval gender relations, and I'll be using it too. I will follow a definition of masculinities from the influential book Masculinities by Carnell from 1995, where it's identified as a configurational practice. So this means that masculinity is not just some form of identity or a role, but actually something that you do. So you engage in activities. Masculinity could be performed by the way you speak, or the way you move, or what kind of activities you participate in. And the body is then an important part of performing masculinity, that you use your body to do these things. And what type of body is then regarded as very masculine, of course, could be very different depending on the context. The activities you engage in can also form the body and leave traces that you can identify in an osteological analysis. So the idea of masculinity as an activity is useful in an osteological study of medieval masculinities. For example, in medieval times, interpersonal violence was a central part of lay masculinities. And here you can see in this skeleton, this is not from Skriðuklaustur, this is from Västerås in Sweden, another material I'm working with, and you can see this blade wound to the back of the head. And this man was buried in the church of the Dominican Priory in Västerås in an area where there are lots of men with similar wounds, another type of weapon-related trauma, and I've interpreted this as a burial area for men of the lay elite, where warrior ideals were very strong, and we performed masculinity in using violence in battle and in martial training and in games, and of course also in just private fighting. So that's one way, one example of how the way you do masculinity can have an impact on your body. But today I will more talk about how your body will affect the way you're able to perform masculinity. And this lay elite masculinity, the knight, is perhaps what you most frequently associate with medieval masculinity. This picture here from a description of the Northern peoples from 1555 by Olaus Magnus. You can see some Icelandic knights here riding down to the harbour to protect the people from the foreign merchants that are trying to cheat and rob them. And this is sort of how we usually picture medieval men being masculine, probably, that they're armed and ready to fight. And central to this lay masculinity were things as bravery and strength and endurance. But these qualities were not just for the lay elite, they were for all men, and including the clergy, but it was just that they acted on them in different ways. So while knights could engage in battle, or perhaps even in a crusade, ideally, the clerics could show their bravery and strength in other ways, in fighting more spiritual battles against temptations of the flesh or the devil. So they acted then in different ways, and that could have an impact on their bodies. Now, the bodies of clerics should ideally be chaste and pure, and to maintain this sort of a more sacred state of the body compared to just ordinary men. They were to avoid lay activities, sex and violence and bloodshed, and to be part of the higher orders, to be ordained as a priest. There was even demands that the body had to be perfect, and that would mean that it was a male body, it was an adult body, and it should be without any blemish. So for instance, it was not allowed to be blind or deaf or mute or have any mutilations to the body, or perhaps very short stature or a hunchback or things like that would disqualify them. Still, there were men who had these sort of defects of the body but still aspired to become priests, and then you could supplicate to the Apostolic Peniten in Rome to get dispensation and be allowed to be a priest anyway. And I don't know if any Icelandic cases of dispensations based on bodily defects, but there are examples from other Nordic countries, like Norway and Sweden, when you are blind in one eye or have lost a finger in some accident or fight, still get permission to be ordained. So this type of perfection I'm talking about, the completeness of the body. And to get the dispensation, it was important that this impairment did not interfere with or pose an obstacle to performing service, that they should still be able to do their work, and it should not be so deformed that they would cause a scandal among the people. So what kind of abilities then were required to be able to perform service? Well, if you look at sort of the daily life in Skriðuklaustur of the canons, it was mainly religious, a religious life focused on the ceremonies that they were performing every day, 6 times a day, and they were praying and singing and so on. But it was not very much manual labor, so physical strength was not as important as the ability to speak, for instance. And I will then be looking today at the mouth, and particularly the teeth. And here you have an example of some teeth, just to show you what I have been looking at. Antemortem tooth loss. Here you have, well, a lot of teeth are still there, but here you can see a tooth missing. But here, where the tooth socket is still there, it fell out later when this person was buried, fell out in the grave. But here, where you see there are no tooth sockets, the teeth fell out earlier and the bone is sort of healed, remodeled, and that would only happen if you're still alive. So there are things like this that I've been looking for in the material, places where teeth are missing, but there is no tooth sockets for them. Would this then cause a problem to lose your teeth? Would people be concerned about it? Well, sort of depending on which teeth you lose and how many, it could have an impact on, for example, your appearance. If it's the front teeth, everybody could see it. If it's the teeth at the back, it could be problems with chewing. And if you lose a lot of teeth, it could also be a problem of speaking clearly, that some sounds are harder to produce if you don't have all your teeth. So this could be a concern then, and affect their abilities. And in one example, I have a quote from a miracle story that I come from a book called Disabilities in Medieval Europe from Metzler, and I bring you the quote here of a medieval knight here. During a battle, a knight who was in his 60s was hit in the mouth by a hilt of a sword and had 4 of his front teeth knocked out. To prevent himself from becoming an incoherent-sounding object of universal derision, he eagerly prayed to the glorious Mother of God for the teeth to be restored. And this would, of course, not be recorded unless the teeth actually were restored. So he got his teeth back, and he was very happy, I assume. What I find interesting is this sort of expression then of how the teeth were important to this man and to his masculinity, I also assume. That he's concerned about how the loss of teeth will sort of affect his status, and then his fellow knights perhaps and other people would make fun of him if he hasn't got his teeth. And I also find it a bit interesting that it's not so much his appearance as his abilities, his ability to speak clearly, that he's worried about. But this is a knight in 12th century France who's worried would a cleric in late medieval Iceland care about if his teeth were there or not. If you look at medieval law, I think tooth loss could perhaps be considered a disability. In John's book, a definition of a disabling wound is that if the wounded is less capable than before, or if it's always visible and neither hair nor clothes could conceal it, then it's disabling. And you can see in this example, this one is also from Västerås. You see he's got an injury to his eyebrow, and in Västerås they just keep hurting each other much more than in Skriðuklaustur, it appears. And this could also have injured his eyes, so it would perhaps also affect his ability to see, not just his appearance. And I think teeth could be regarded in a similar manner, that the loss of a lot of teeth could affect both your appearance. It's hard to conceal unless you always keep your mouth shut, and your ability to chew and to speak could also be affected by this. So it could be considered a disabling wound. In Swedish medieval law, the fine rates for if you hit someone would be similar if you knock out 4 teeth as if the person you injure would lose a limb. So it would be considered quite severe to lose your teeth in that comparison. So with this background then of tooth loss and masculinities, I'm going to the best bits, the examples. And they are from Skriðuklaustur in eastern Iceland. I'm not sure if this might be familiar to everyone in Iceland already, but in case it's not. And this is an Augustinian monastery from the last part of the Middle Ages. So it's founded by the late 15th century and then closed at the Reformation, so it only operates for about 60 years, so quite a limited time. And it was excavated in the early 21st century by Steinar Kristinsdottir, and this photo is from 2011 when I participated also in the excavation. And as you can see here, the church building and the monastic buildings here, they have already been excavated and reconstructed, like the base of the walls, and now excavation is going on in the cemeteries and also on this side here. In a map of the area, you can see monastic complex over here, the church here, and a lot of graves surrounding it. Different areas we used for burial of different graves of people. So you have patients of the hospital here, you have lay brothers and sisters, benefactors, and a typical location then for members of the religious community is here, east of the church. And in Skriðuklaustur, it's not just the canons, it's also their family members and some of the patients that are buried here. So of this group here, it's actually only a few that are canons and have been identified as canons. And in this study, I have not included all the skeletons, but only the ones that are reasonably well preserved, so you can get an estimation of sex and age group. And also, of course, they have to have some teeth left, or at least some of the jawbone to be interesting, and that leaves 123 individuals. And, well, have they lost their teeth? Let's have a look. Antemortem tooth loss, that's this here, and you can see nearly half, about 45% have lost at least one tooth. So it is quite common. And if you look just at the anterior teeth, like the front teeth, the most visible ones, the incisors and canines, then it's 28%. So it's also quite a lot of people where the tooth loss is really visible. But losing one tooth might not be such a big problem. So I also looked at how many have lost a lot of teeth then, how many have lost a quarter of their teeth, and that is 8 teeth out of the entire set and 3 of the front teeth. And you can see it's just over 10%, it's 12-13% who have lost a lot of teeth, a quarter of the teeth, and that was like more than 1 in 10 have sort of extensive tooth loss. And this is very much associated with age. Hardly surprising that old people have lost teeth more frequently than young people, and they have lost more teeth as well. And here I only have 2 age groups to make this clear and simple. This is adolescents and young adults up to about 35 years age, and here you have older individuals and middle-aged people over 36. And as you can see, even the young people are losing their teeth sometimes, but it's not as common as among the older people, where it's about 66% that lost at least one tooth. It's also only in the older adult group that you have people who lost a quarter of their teeth. The young people usually just lose one or a few teeth. And in these older people, it's associated then with generally poor oral health. So you have periodontitis and very worn teeth, for instance, and usually you have a loss of both the teeth in the front and the teeth at the back. If you look at this here, you can see the blue bits here. These are the ones who lost the front teeth, and the pink, the ones who lost the teeth at the back, and the purple here, those who have lost both in the front and the back. And as you can see, quite a lot of people are just losing their front teeth. Maybe it's due to trauma that they accidentally knock their teeth out, while the old people then is usually part of a general tooth loss. Very few have lost just their front teeth. If they lose the teeth at the front, they're losing the teeth at the back as well. So it looks kind of different depending on how old you are, but all age groups have tooth loss. And then after this sort of general idea, we're going to focus on this part of the cemetery. We have the burials of the canons. Close up on this, and our first example is this grave, number 36, identified as a canon, and this is what the grave looks like, photographed from the excavation. And you can see it's reasonably well preserved, buried in a coffin, and this man was middle-aged at the time of death. And already during excavation it was noted that he was unusually tall. The coffin was over 2 meters long, and the estimated stature of this man is about 183 centimeters. And that might seem quite average to us today, but in Skriðuklaustur he's the tallest man, and he's about 15 centimeters above the mean stature of men. He was also rather slender built, so he probably looked very tall to the other people living there. And if we move into looking closer at his head, you can see there's some damage to the bone here, so not all teeth could be examined, but at least 13 of his teeth have been lost ante-mortem. And here you can see a gap in the front and also here in the upper jaw. So all his front teeth are missing, and also quite a lot of the teeth at the back. And you can see periodontitis here, that lots of the tooth roots are exposed. And here is a big cavity. He also has caries, which is very unusual here. So generally poor health, oral health in this middle-aged man. The next example is close to that. What is the other one? And here we have number 39. Also one of the canons in Skriðuklaustur, and very well preserved, and you can see remains of the coffin here. And in this grave there's also a find here next, sort of in this area, next to the fingers of his left hand was this golden ring, which could suggest that he might even have been a prior at the monastery and a man of some importance there. And if you look at his teeth, they look pretty nice, don't they? Slight periodontitis here and a bit worn, but not very much. And this man was quite old when he died, maybe in his 60s or so. And if you look at other people in the oldest age group, their teeth look like this. You can see hardly anything left. The roots are exposed. You have this periapical lesion. And this elderly woman, only 3 teeth are left, and they are probably quite loose. As you can see, only the tip of the roots are still in the bone. So compared to them, his teeth look remarkably good, but still not quite perfect. You can see it. Here's a gap. He's missing 3 teeth, and there are also these cavities here. So he is also suffering from caries. And these 2 men that I mentioned, they're the only 2 ones that have caries in this material in Skriðuklaustur. So it's interesting that both of them are canons, and maybe something to investigate further in the future if they had a different diet or different oral hygiene compared to the rest. Next, we can look at this grave, number 63, also buried in a coffin east of the church. And you can see all reasonably well preserved bones. And there's some signs of infection here. You can, for instance, see that the leg here looks a bit funny. They also have a healed fracture. And this man was rather young at the time of death, only somewhere between 16 and 19 years old. So he was perhaps studying to become a cleric, but not ordained yet. A young man. And as you might expect, his teeth also look really good. Hardly any wear, no periodontitis, no teeth lost ante-mortem. But there is actually 1 tooth missing, and it's a bit hard to notice. You really have to count the teeth. You can see that it only got 3 front teeth instead of 4. But he hasn't lost one. There's no gap for a tooth, so it's probably congenitally absent. He never had it in the first place. And as there is no gap or anything, I don't think anyone would really have noticed or cared about it, or that it would have caused any practical problems for this man. Now, apart from canons, there were also lay people, patients, buried in this area, and I'm going to show you a couple of them as well to compare. First, this one, 155, also buried in a coffin. You can see a well-preserved skeleton, sort of squeezed into this coffin. This was an elderly man with was rather poor health. He had both signs of infection and of osteoarthritis in the skeleton. And if you look at his teeth, quite a few are missing. He has lost 8 teeth. You see all the front teeth in the upper jaw, and sort of unlucky for him, on the left side here he lost the molars in the mandible, and on the right side the molars in the maxilla. So he's probably got a bit hard to chew his food. So generally poor oral health, lots of exposed roots here, worn teeth, and you can see also this periapical lesion here. So what a lot of older people look like, they have lost teeth and poor oral health. And the final example is this man up here, also identified as patient, and this grave looks like this. We can see a sort of well-preserved or half reasonably well-preserved skeleton down to the knees, and then it has been cut by a later grave, so the lower legs and feet are missing. If we have a look, he also has some osteoarthritis and bone infection, but if you look particularly at the teeth, there are only 3 teeth missing at the front here. The rest of them are still there. And if you look from the side here, you can also see that some periodontitis and this lesion down here. But I would suggest that the reason for the tooth loss is in fact this little bump here, healed blunt force trauma to the jaw that might have knocked the teeth out. And this could be an accident, that he's falling and hitting some kind of object here, or interpersonal violence, that someone hits him on the chin. As the teeth are rather worn down here, the opposing teeth to those are lost, just as worn as the rest of the dentition, it probably happened rather late in life, otherwise they would not be worn at all. But at least you can see that the tooth sockets here, they are completely healed, so it must have passed like at least half a year, maybe more, several years, from this tooth loss until the time of death of this individual. So, apart from these 3 canons that I've mentioned, there are 2 more, and one is this, 182, and this was not very well preserved. That's why I don't bring them up as examples, that these 2 are poorly preserved. So in this individual, 11 teeth are still there, where the other ones are, nobody knows if they were lost while he's still alive or if they were lost later. But the teeth that are left are very worn. In some cases, it's just the root fragments left. So it probably his oral health was not that good, but I can't really tell if he lost any teeth. And the other one is this, 186, and that is also a really poorly preserved skeleton, but all the teeth are there at least. So no antemortem tooth loss in this individual. So there is quite a variety of oral health within this group of canons, and that were the other 3 that I talked about. In number 63, probably no problem with the teeth at all. 1 tooth is missing, but I don't think anyone would have noticed that. In number 39 here, 3 teeth are missing, but no one that was really visible. And as there are not so many, I don't think that would be much of a problem either. Probably his caries would be more of a problem than the lost teeth. And remarkably good oral health concerning his age. But this man here, number 36, lost quite a lot of teeth, and all his front teeth. For him, it could actually have caused a problem and altered both appearance and abilities to speak and to chew. So the question is then if this would be, if he would still be able to perform clerical masculinity, if this would be causing practical problems that were too severe. If you think back to the idea that you have to get dispensation for your body defects, you have to be able to perform and you have to not cause scandal by your gross appearance. I don't think anyone would be offended by someone looking toothless because it was so common, so they must have been quite used to it. And particularly, I mean, this man was middle-aged, and in the middle-aged and older people, that might even have been, the expected way to look and to sound when you speak. But still, can be discussed further how they would react to this and what he himself would think of this. And then the other two examples I mentioned here, which would be are part of the laity. Then, if you look at the general population in the Skriðuklaustur, poor health and poor oral health is quite common, and lots of people have lost their teeth. These two men both have lost front teeth, but they are still rather different. In this man down here that is old, it's part of his generally poor oral health and tooth loss, and he's also buried in a coffin, just as the canons. So here you can see that they sort of are rather similar. You can even think that the two categories, patient and canon, are not always mutually exclusive, that if a canon gets older and gets poor health, he might need treatment just as the patients at the hospital. While this man probably had his teeth knocked out. It could be an accident, it could be in a violent encounter, and that would put him closer to lay masculinity and the type of behavior you expect in a layman. So it could have been, for instance, a warrior who was employed by the prior or something like that. But both these men, as they are buried in this area, you can imagine that they had some kind of special relationship to the monastery, at least that was the reason for them to be buried in this particular area. So, to summarize then what I've been talking about today, if you've forgotten, masculinity is understood as performed, something you do, and the body is then important to perform, to be able to perform masculinity, both its appearance and its abilities. And to be able to perform clerical masculinity in medieval time, speech was central, and your mouth was central. And lost teeth could make speech unclear and alter appearance, so making it harder to perform clerical masculinity. In Skriðuklaustur, lost teeth was common, but there was a diversity. I mean, there were people with a perfect set of teeth, and there were actually one woman had no teeth at all. All had been lost. So it varies quite a lot between different individuals, both the canons and the rest of the people buried there. And a question to discuss then is, perhaps a canon with the loss of teeth gone, his body was perhaps not perfect, but was it still acceptable? Would it be an example perhaps of how the bodily perfection was not absolute, but something that you could negotiate and sort of redefine what would be included in a passable body, at least. So, thank you very much for listening, and here we got another lovely set of teeth from a young individual buried at Skriðuklaustur.
Thank you very much. So, questions?
Margaret Cormack is my name. I have a question and a comment. And first, thank you very much for an absolutely fascinating presentation. The question is, have you any idea why they were losing their teeth? So you suggested poor oral hygiene.
think there are cases of scurvy here, but not that many, but at least potential cases which look like that could have been a reason. A lot of people are rather old here as well. There are quite a lot of older people buried at this site, so that could also contribute to that is so common with tooth loss. Well, as I said, caries is very unusual, so that's probably not a reason, but periodontitis, quite a lot of older people have, and also, I haven't shown any pictures of that today, but like really, really huge deposits of calculus on the teeth. So that is also common, that they have like huge lumps. You can hardly even see the teeth in some cases. But I have not looked that much into the reasons behind it yet, but could perhaps be something to look closer at.
Okay, so my comment is that you quoted from Young's book, which is of course a totally secular law code. And what would be interesting here would be to see what is in the church laws, if they make any consideration of this, and specifically in canon law. And I will get your email and we can talk about this, because I have a good source that sometimes sheds light on such things.
Okay, yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, that bit, there are sort of two bits that I haven't got so far on yet, and one is sort of the cultural attitudes towards tooth loss in the time, such as laws or sagas or whatever where you discuss teeth and mouth. And the other bit that I'm not gone so far on is sort of the clinical bit on it, how it will affect you, in fact. And I only read a few studies on that, sort of which sounds are hardest to pronounce and so on when you're missing teeth. So thank you very much. I will be very happy to read that.
Because one of the issues is what you would want to know is whether people are being refused ordination on the grounds that they don't have teeth. And that does not happen when you're old. It happens when you're young. And I think that would be most unlikely, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, I also think that it would be unlikely, but I would also be interested in, for example, if your sort of your status as a man would change as you age, as you become less and less able, perhaps, with declining health and with loss of teeth.
I wonder if the distinction between the lay and the clerics in terms of injuries may not be as clear, because as you seem to suppose, because there are records of abbots taking part in battles, even leading, an attack. So even if someone is found with injuries, loss of teeth or to his head or whatever, he could have been a cleric, not a secular. I mean, there are different sources about this. Some sources say they couldn't use swords, they could use sticks. But anyway, there are records of, for instance, the abbot of Abili, then pretty old, rushing out with his men to fight. So, I mean, you could have, theoretically at least, I mean, I don't know about any sources about concerning that in the East at the time of the prerequisite, but theoretically you could have a cleric with injuries that would identify him as a layman.
No, I absolutely agree with that. That was more sort of a suggestion. I can't even tell if it was violence. He could have just fallen and hurt himself. So in a particular case, you can definitely not identify someone as a cleric or layman because of their injuries. I mean, clerical masculinity is sort of not endorse violence as in the same way. The practice of violence is more limited, that you should punish transgressions, for example, by hurting this person, whipping them and so on. But most of the violence is sort of self-directed. But then not everybody followed this, obviously. So both going to war and being drunken feud, drunken pub brawl with the lay people, and lots of when I mentioned these lost fingers, that could happen in fights, for instance, when clerics are involved in fighting, cut off or bite off each other's fingers. So definitely a point here that you should not think that these two spheres are separate. The ideals could be different while the people behave the same in both groups.
So I just wanted to follow up on that one. There is a woman called Elizabeth Walkenbach now at the Art in Scotland, and she is investigating precisely the canon law that exists in Iceland and elsewhere on violence against clerics. So I'll maybe put you guys in touch as well.
Oh, thank you.
I have one question. When you say tooth loss is common in Skriðuklaustur, do you have comparative material from the same period or other periods which can put this in context of how unusual is this kind or range of tooth loss?
Oh, no, that's a good point. I have not compared it to other materials, but that would be really interesting because it might be common everywhere. When I talk about it, I mean that it's common. I just mean that it is like a large proportion of the people have lost teeth. But maybe if you compare some other sites when everyone lost their teeth, it would be like, oh no, Skriðuklaustur, they got lovely teeth in comparison. So sorry, I don't really know that yet.